Hello everybody and welcome back to Plant Boy. My name is Cade, and as you can tell by the title of today's video, we are going to be discussing composting. Let this be your beginner's guide to composting. I started composting about a year ago, so I am by no means an expert. There are a lot of great resources out there for you to use, a lot of great YouTube videos that you can check out as well. If you find a particular method or have particular questions as we go through this beginner guide. So in this video, we will talk about why you should compost, what you should compost, and how you should compost. So please feel free to use the timestamps in the comment below or in the description below to skip around to whatever you need to see. Also, I have a little guide in front of me here because it's a lot to go through. So if you see me looking down or referencing my paper, that is why. So we'll start off with why you should compost. Composting is a great way to reduce your waste. This is my personal reason for composting. I was absolutely amazed at how many vegetable scraps, cardboard pieces, grass clippings, houseplant scraps, so many things that you can put into compost to reduce your footprint. In addition, once your compost is complete, it is a very nutrient-rich soil amendment that you can use to fertilize houseplants, put in a garden, or put in your flower beds or anything like that. So let's talk about what you should compost. So there are two main categories of composting materials that you may hear referenced. You will hear of carbon product, which is brown material, and you will hear of nitrogen-rich content, which is green material. So carbon-rich or brown products commonly include hay, cardboard, leaves, sawdust, wood, egg cartons, paper towels, dried grass clippings, and shredded paper. On the other hand, you have your nitrogen-rich or your green ingredients. These are going to be things such as vegetable waste, fresh grass clippings, fresh leaves, old flowers, coffee grounds, coffee filters, houseplant scraps, and weeds as well. So you can think about green or brown. Ideally, you want to have a very carbon-rich mix. If you have a compost that smells, it is most likely due to an imbalance in carbon to nitrogen ratios. More often than not, you may have a problem with too high of a nitrogen content, which can lead to a kind of smelly compost, and that's not what you want. Ideally, compost is not going to smell at all. Let's talk about things that you should not compost. You should not by any means compost animal manure that comes from carnivores or omnivores. You should only really compost herbivore manure. So chickens, cows, other grazers and things like that. Their manure is okay to compost. However, I've heard that you want to make sure you are giving it quite a bit of time to break down, at least a year or so. Not totally positive on that. I don't compost manure, so I could not tell you. And you don't want to compost any kind of animal products, anything very high in fat, or anything very high in dairy, such as cheese, ice cream, so on and so forth. The reason for this is that it all attracts pests, it all contributes to a foul smell, and it does not break down as readily. In addition, you should not be composting any kind of diseased plants. So if you have a house plant or something in the garden that has like a mold problem or a fungus problem, steer clear of the compost bin, just toss that out. The last thing that I'm going to recommend you not compost is coal and charcoal. And the reason for that is that the chemicals in charcoal and the chemicals in coal are harmful to plants, so you definitely don't want to be putting that in a garden or flower bed or house plant or anything like that. So let's talk about how you should compost. There are many different ways of composting. More often than not, you are going to hear things usually broken down into two categories, and those are hot composting and cold composting. So hot composting is whenever you have a mound of compost that you are turning readily, usually exposed to sunlight, and it gets very, very hot within that compost pile. This is especially beneficial if you are looking to compost perennial weeds or any kind of weeds that you may find in the garden or in your landscaping area. So the high temperatures within that compost mound actually kill the seeds, which in turn make sure that you are not going to have a compost bin or a compost pile full of weeds. More often than not, hot composting is the traditional method of composting, and it is very fast as well because the heat actually speeds up the decomposition. So hot composting is a good way to go. You would definitely want to look up a guide on hot composting if that is where you want to go. Like I said earlier, this is not really going to dive too in depth because it's way too much to cover in one video, but rather be more of a stepping stone so you know where to go and what to look up if you are a beginner to composting. On the other hand, you have cold composting, and this is usually a mound that is continuously added to and is not ever really turned. So if you are looking to just dig a trench, dump some food in there, cover it up, let it go, that would be a form of cold composting. I would not recommend that you put any weeds in your cold composting area because the weeds will spring back up and those seeds will not be killed. Cold composting is actually also a slower method as well because there is not as much heat and not as much decomposition happening. So if you are not on nearly as tight of a schedule and you're not trying to turn compost over fast and fast and fast, cold composting is a good way to go. And now there are different forms of composting, as I've kind of talked about. So you have things like mounds where you just have a heap of compost of organic material, brown and green, and you continuously turn that, or you don't turn it depending on if you are going to go the hot or cold composting route. I personally have something called a tumbler, which is like a 2-compartment thing that you are adding to one side and waiting on the other side. So you have 2 batches going at once, and you actually turn that every once in a while and spin the tumbler, and that aerates it and speeds up the process as well. So tumblers are good if you are okay with spending a little bit more money because you have to buy the tumbler, of course, and if you are living in a more suburban area where you are not looking to have kind of an unsightly dirt pile in your area. There's also something called the bokashi method, which is used anaerobically, meaning that there is no presence of oxygen. Typically it is done in a bucket with a mixture of different things. It's yeast, bacteria, and something else. Not totally positive on the bokashi method, but the bokashi, B-O-K-A-S-H-I method is very beneficial if you have a small space, if you are living in an urban area, and if you do not want to fuss with critters getting in your compost, which are actually a good thing. If you don't want to have worms or anything in your space, check out the bokashi method. Lastly, there are things like worm bins out there as well, where you have lots of worms that help the decomposition process. So there are many different ways of composting your materials and things like that. You definitely want to do your research and figure out which method is best for you. So yeah, everyone, I know that this wasn't a super in-depth guide by any means. One day I will definitely be showing you my composting setup and how I do things, but I hope if you are a beginner to composting, or if you have not begun to compost yet, this is a good video to kind of introduce you to composting and different methods, and just kind of a beginner guide, we'll say. And again, I'm relatively new to the composting game, have not been doing it for very long at all. So if you have any helpful tips or anything like that, please leave it in the comments below. Let's grow together. But yeah, let me know if you guys have any specific questions or anything like that. Like I said, a lot of great resources out there that you can take advantage of online. And I will see you all in the next video. Get to composting. See ya.